Hello, and welcome back to our series on building a functioning people and culture management system, or HCM. Brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, principal consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions. And in this video, I'd like to continue building the foundational framework for our system interface. And up to this point, we simply created a series of files here. So we have a main GS, a utilities GS, and then an HTML file that is our people and culture management homepage, which is what we were just looking at. And we use do-get as a function to jump into the HTML service, which provided an output from a file. And then we took a input box that asks the user to type their name. They click the name, and we can show it here in action. We'll just refresh it here. And what this does is this grabs the input. So we just put a name in here. We'll put my name, that's fine. And it grabs the input, whatever value is entered in here. And then we hit submit. It sends it over to our server side, and our server side does some things. Basically, it creates this line here, and then it sends it back to our client side, and then it populates it here. So we've effectively connected our HTML and our server side. And now what I would like to do is kind of continue preparing for the actual building of our PCM system. So anytime that we develop a solution or design a solution, before we begin sitting down and coding or creating or anything like that, we need to have a plan. We need to have a vision of what that's going to look like, what it's going to do, who's going to use it, all that stuff. So we can then just create it under that umbrella. And we've done that ahead of time. So we have a vision of what our PCM is going to look like, the functionality it's going to have, where it's going to get that information from, how we're going to authorize it, how we're going to do all this other stuff. So we have that. And in knowing that end result, we also know that our code here is going to grow significantly. And not only this body tag, our actual HTML guts, if you will, but also our script. Our script tag for this JavaScript in here is going to grow significantly because we're going to have our page interact with our server side. So instead of just leaving this as one big, massive file, I would like to take this episode here and create what's called templates, to where instead of having styles here, we can take this style tag, put it in its own file, and then pass that through to our main.js file to essentially use and render that page. So that's what we're going to start doing. So let's go over here to our style tag first. And the way we're going to do this is we are going to, if you've done anything with PHP, you'll recognize this. It should look familiar. It's kind of the same concept. What we're going to do is we are going to create essentially a tag that is going to render some JavaScript. So when we type this in here, now this isn't going to be an in-depth, this isn't an in-depth HTML series. If you would like me to do one, I'll be more than happy to. But when we create this, what we're saying is that we want to run JavaScript within here. And we need these left and right carets, the question mark, the exclamation point, and equal. So if we don't have the equals and the exclamation point, it's not going to render it as JavaScript. It's going to try to render it as HTML. And we can play around with that. But what we're wanting to run, this JavaScript that we're wanting to run, is going to be in the form of a function. So let's just give that function a name. And we'll call this gather, because what we're doing is we are wanting to gather whatever file we're putting this in. And what we're wanting to gather at this place is going to be a file name. And that file name is going to get passed as an argument to this function. And let's give that file name, let's just call it home CSS. So now if we say didn't have this exclamation point and equal sign, let's get rid of this exclamation point here. And then we'll save it. And then let's go back to our page and we'll refresh that. And as you can see, when we refresh it, it's not rendering it as JavaScript. It's not running that function. It's just producing HTML. It's just putting it right here up on top. So in order to get us to run this as JavaScript, we need that exclamation point. So now if we were to save this and run it, we're going to get an error, of course. And the reason we're getting an error is because this home CSS doesn't exist yet. And I think that's because I didn't save. Yep. Okay, there we go. So we're going to have to create this home CSS file in order to get this to render correctly. Forgot that little semicolon there. I don't know if it actually makes a difference, but we'll see. So we don't actually have, one, we don't have this function created, and two, we don't have this file. So let's go ahead and create that HTML file. And this HTML file is going to be home CSS. Now this is still HTML, but we don't need all of this. What we need to do is grab our style tags. We can cut that out and then simply place that in here. And then what we'll need to do is now create this JavaScript file. So let's come over here to our main GS file here, and we'll create that function. It will be function gather, and we are going to pass the file name, which is this home CS. That's what we're getting. We're getting that name of that file. So we can just simply just call it file name, which is fine. And then our function is going to return an HTML service. And we are going to create an output from a file, but we don't want to have one file because now we have two different HTML files. We have CSS and we have this home file. And then we're also going to do another one for our JavaScript. So what we want to do is we want to create an output from file. And that output isn't going to be like we were up here doing a single page. It's going to be this argument, the file name. And since we're passing the file name, what we need to do is we need to get the content of this page. So get content, like that. So now that we're doing it this way, we're getting multiple, instead of just calling a HTML output from file as a single file, we're actually having to get the content from individual ones and then pass that here to render that style script. We're not able to do this. But what we can do is, instead of that, we can do HTML service. And instead of creating an HTML template or an HTML from file, what we want to do is create a template from file, and then our template file name is going to be PCM home. And let's clear this out. And what we're going to have to do is when we get this template from file, we are going to have to render that or evaluate it in order for it to work. So now let's save this. And let's go back over to our page here and then refresh it. And you'll see that that funny little thing went away. That HTML piece went away and it is rendering fine. So now what we can do is let's go back over to our code and change something in our CSS. Like we gave this the margin left of 3 REM. Let's select the body, and just for the sake of demonstrations, let's give that body a padding of, let's do something extreme. Let's do 15 REM or 15 EM all the way around. And then let's save this and then go back to our web app here, refresh it. And as you can see, whatever we put in that file is then rendered as that style. So now let's do the same thing down here to our script. So we want to include a script file. So let's do this, and let's do gather, because that's the name of our function. And let's pass a file name through here, and let's just call this home JS. Now let's create that file here. Now this is on our HTML side. So it's not going to be a GS file, it's going to be an HTML file where our JavaScript goes here in between our script tags. So this is home.js, and inside our home.js is going to be all of this. So let's come down here. We will get rid of all this and just include everything in our script tags. And now we're actually not having to do anything with our main, because whatever file it is that we're passing is being created here, and then we're getting the content. So then we're able to populate that home.js file and its script tag right there. So now let's save this and then come back over here and let's refresh it. Okay, we could probably do something with this. It doesn't need to be that far down. It's kind of painful to look at, but anyway. And then let's just type in, I don't know, a name, Beth, and our functionality should still work as intended. And it does. Perfect. So now this is a way that we can really clean up our code and keep it somewhat consolidated together. So we'll have a style file, and then we'll have our JavaScript file. Okay, good. Let's go over to our main.js, and this function right here is actually what I would consider a utility function. It's working on the overall framework and structure of the web app. It's not necessarily the UI piece of it. So this is the reason why I would consider this a utility. So we can actually cut this and put it in our utility file just to keep it clean. And as you can see, the great thing about JavaScript, or not JavaScript, excuse me, Google Apps Script, is when you're working inside this app script project page, each one of these files is accessible to the whole script. Now, the reason why we had to do it this way with the content is because we're not actually creating a whole file page. What we're doing is we're creating just small snippets to place as our style and our script tag. So let's go back over to our mains.js and actually get our data, because remembering we have over 500, let me make this bigger so everybody can see it. We have over 500 lines of data, 500 employees that goes out to this BX column. So we have a substantial amount of data, but let's go ahead and grab all this data and put it into a two-dimensional array. And we'll create a function to do that. And we'll just say function, just say get employee data for now. We may change that, but for now, we just want to grab that data. So let's create a variable. And let's call this variable, let's create a constant. And this constant variable will just be, let's call it all employee data. And what that variable is going to be equal to is our spreadsheet app. We want to get the active spreadsheet, because remember, this is bound to it. And we want to get the sheet by name. And the name of our sheet is called employee data. And then we want to get the values of that data. And let's log this out, because I'm curious to see how long this is going to take. I'm pretty sure it's going to take a bit, because depending on how long this is going to take, like I said, I'm sure it's going to take a long time, but we may call this data and store it in a variable once we're rendering things. That way it's just there available, sort of in the head of our operations here, instead of having to call it later on. But let's see. So let's save this. Now we'll have to do some authorization, of course. Review permissions. Going to be myself. We got to go advanced. Unsafe. Scroll down. Allow. And run. Get values is not a function. Okay, so let me see what we did here. Let's see, spreadsheet app, get active spreadsheet. Oh, wow, I got way ahead of myself here. Okay, so this, get rid of that get values piece. So this is actually going to be, I got way ahead of myself. Apologize about that. So this is not going to be this. This is going to be our sheet. We're not going to need to do that, because one thing we didn't give it was a range. So now we'll do let all employee data equal sheet, and then we got to get the range of that sheet. And then we want to start at, let's see here, we want to start at row 2, because we don't want this header right here. So we start at row 2, column 1, and then let's get to our last row. And since we're starting at 2, we're going to have to subtract 1 to take care of that additional row that is being misplaced by starting at the second row. And then we can just go over and get last column. And then we can get values now that we got the range. Okay, and now let's log out all employee data, and that should pull it. Sorry about that. I was trying to go too quick. We can also get rid of that thing right there. So we'll save it. Now we'll run it. And it's going to be truncated because that's just too long. But it didn't take that long to pull, actually. It didn't take that long at all to pull, actually. So that's actually good. So we can keep this. We'll still create a global variable, but we'll make this a constant. Okay, so now that we have our data, we can go create some pieces in our HTML to actually receive some of that data or write to it. Because even with an HCM, I know this is definitely part of an HRIS system, is the CRUD aspect, the create, read, update, delete. With our HCM or a PCM, there's going to be a degree of that. We are going to want to create a record, say somebody goes to a training or something like that, or whatnot. So we're going to want to actually create a record, read a record, update it, and delete. Now in HR, we don't delete anything, but we do archive it. So instead of deleting it, we will take that record and move it over to another archive tab. But we need a place to actually do that in our HTML. And before I do that, I want to reset our title here. So let's do set title. And one thing that I've learned is this like X-frame options mode, and you can create XML and stuff like that. Anytime that we render or create a web app, you're going to have that banner up top. This wasn't made by Google, dismissed or whatever. It's made by a private user. You can actually get rid of that if you place this onto another web page and render it as either an iframe or X-frame or something along those lines. Just a little tidbit of information, because I spent a significant amount of time trying to, one, get rid of that, which you can't, but two, hide it so it doesn't show, and that's the way that you can do it. So let's set this title to Prairie PCM. There we go. So now let's go back here to our home page, and the way that we're going to want our home page laid out is we have our heading up here, and we're not going to have this. This will be the heading. What we're going to want to do is initially have a user select what it is that they're wanting to do. So our functionality is going to come in different views. So we're going to have a page specifically for, say, compensation, like the compensation analysis and modeling. If we give everybody a 5% raise, what is that going to do and how much is that going to cost? And then also a career pathing page and a training page. So, and by page, I mean view. It's going to create a different view within this web app here. Now, I could just go in and, create other inputs, create other stuff here in HTML, and then style it a little bit. And or what I could do is just use a library. So for the sake of simplicity, I am going to use a library, and this library is fairly known. So let me find it here. And what I'm going to use is Bootstrap. Now, I am not saying this is the greatest library on the planet. Um, it's just something that I like using. And the reason I like using it is because they do tend to keep up the versions. Like there's some that I use. I used to use Material CSS, and Material was built by MIT students. And I'm not sure if they graduated or whatever, but it just wasn't updated. So as websites and browsers changed, their code and their library kind of fell to the wayside. And this tends to be Bootstrap here tends to be pretty up to date. So we'll just use Bootstrap, and instead of having to create CSS from scratch, what we can do is just call Bootstrap CSS as well as its JavaScript plugins and its other front ends aspects to use within our HTML. So to do this, what we can do is we can either download the whole thing, which in the future, what I personally like doing, I do like downloading it and then cutting out the CSS piece and putting it in our own file, just so I'm not having to call things back and forth. Um, but it's either or, whatever you want to do. So let's go to Docs. And when you click on Docs, you'll see that they have this little, quick start template. So what we would want is we would want let's just grab this piece. So we don't want to include anything in the body. We just want this, and it carries over some of our meta tags and sets a title. So that's good. And then we'll come back over here to our page here and simply copy it over. Now we don't need this. We don't need this extra head here because we want to include our own CSS file. And we don't want our title to be Bootstrap demo. We want it to be Prairie PCM. That'll be fine. And then we need to come back over here and grab our JavaScript piece. And our JavaScript piece is right here. Okay, so we can also include the popper and our JS separately. If we don't want to use drop downs, we're going to use drop downs and tooltips. I love tooltips. Let's include the popper. So we'll just include all this. So we'll copy this, come back over here to our script. Now we don't have to put it down here because we're already calling that. So instead, what we can do is just go over here to our JS and just include it here. So that way we're calling it. So now let's go ahead and save this. And we'll refresh our page. Let's come back over here to our page here and let's refresh it. And you'll notice that it did change a little bit. And that's because now we are using Bootstrap's elements. So let's actually get rid of this because that's painful to look at. Let's get rid of that border, or not that border, but that padding. Let's come up here and let's just get rid of this body padding. And now that we're using Bootstrap, there we go. We can take advantage of the other things that they have. So they have a front-end toolkit that consists of quite a few things. So we have forms, we have components, we can do the accordions, and as you can see, badges, buttons. So for right now, let's just grab this button And you'll see that the type button, but what they've done is they've given it a class of BTN. And this BTN inside their CSS is how they're handling it and how they're, making it do certain things. So let's go ahead and let's just do the primary button here real quick. And we'll change our button to look like that. And then after we do this, we can really start building out that home page for our user to interact with. So let's come back here to our code, to our HTML, and here's our button. So we want this to be submit, and we want to give this on click here, like so. And anytime you're using anytime that you're using a library or a front-end toolkit such as Bootstrap, you're kind of stuck with what it is that they have for colors and styles. You're kind of stuck with this unless you go in and do some CSS on top of this. And that's what we're going to have to do, because we're going to build this for Prairie HR. So we're going to have the branding for Prairie HR Solutions in there. So it's going to be the brown and the lighter brown colors, and they just don't have that. So we'll have to do some CSS adjustments on top of theirs, and we can simply do that by just declaring them as important. But we can get to that a little bit later. So now let's save this and go back, and you'll see that this submit button should change to that primary blue color that they have. And there we go. Sure does. So now what we can do is we can go through and begin building our web page, which I'll do in the next video. We'll start building it, and then we can start working on the functionality of each one of those. The very first thing that we're going to want a user to do is to select what it is that they're wanting to do initially. Do they want to go to a compensation page? Do they want to do the training? What is it that they're working on? We want them to select that piece first. Before I go, though, I'd like to get this border out of here. And with Bootstrap, I'd like to give it a little bit of a space here. And Bootstrap allows you to do that. And how it allows you to do that is by a container. And it's a container class that they have. And we've already wrapped this in a div. So we can give this div class equals container. And then what I like to do is come down here and leave a comment. Now, these are comments in HTML. They're different than in JavaScript, but in HTML, they're this little number. And I just write the class so I know where that div ends. It's easier for me to read. Now that we've given this class in the container, and it works the same way with forms or whatnot, you can see that the container that they have set up in CSS provides these margins and padding. So that'll be fine. Maybe we'll do something up here in the beginning or up here in the top later on. But okay, good. So now we have a template created, so we can render our script and JS tag. We can make them as big as we want now. And we also have the front end toolkit called, which is in the form of Bootstrap. So our next video, we will go through and build that initial drop-down selection box here, and then do something with it. And we'll call information from that spreadsheet variable that we also did and do something with. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I hope to see you for our next episode. And until then, please take care.